Call the meeting to order. First on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for
all. Roll call. Vince?
Present.
Going to some Christmas. Here. Brian, present. Erica here. All right. Was a meeting properly notified?
Yes, the meeting is properly noticed and is being recorded per handbook.
All right. Welcome to visitors. Do we have public comment at this time? No? Okay. Anybody online? No? Okay. I don't believe we have anything for highlight on youth today.
That is correct.
All right. Next, comments by board members and superintendent. Superintendent annual review timeline.
I just want to remind everyone of the process and the timeline. So between now and the next board meeting, August 2nd, I'll submit my comments and documentation supporting the goals and the areas that you evaluate me on. And then August 2nd, we'll discuss them a little bit in closed session. And then between August 2nd and August 16th, you submit your comments via that same document. Brian will be the clearinghouse and gather those comments and then score me 1 through 5 on each category. And then August 16th in closed session, we'll discuss that. Brian, board president, then will take that, correlate everything, and summarize it, and then meet with me per the employee handbook before the end of August, which is August 31st sometime, and sign it. So that's the process and the timeline.
The only thing that I like to remind people is it's the board's evaluation, so your individual comments may or may not make the cut. You know, if everybody's comes in and we'll have an opportunity to talk, and then you'll summarize it, and these are the board consensus and things that we want you to work on, or attaboys or whatever. But you know, I may say you did a terrible job, didn't make the cut. That's okay, because it's the board's assessment, not our individual 360s.
An important piece to it then is through that process of developing goals for the current year. So as you saw, then we meet quarterly and discuss where I'm at in achieving those goals quarterly.
So just so everyone's aware, like we might be on vacation in the middle of that, so I might ask you for a quick turn. Or the second turn might be very quick, right? So depending on when we get everything together, front end or back end could be tight before the 16th. So just so I get a chance to pull it together, preferably not on the 16th. I need to pull that together. Don't really want to use PTO for that, but it would be worth it too. All right, scheduled presentation by guests and staff members. Scientific random sample survey presentation. Rob Demuse.
It's going to be Bill Foster, it looks like.
Okay.
It's on with us. Yeah.
Okay.
From School Perceptions. So welcome, Bill. You are able to share your screen if you want to present any documents. Just see the little icon there. The up arrow is present now if you have something you want to share. Otherwise, I'm going to pin you. There we go. And we have up on our displays here in the boardroom, we can see that pretty well. So I'll turn it over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me tonight. Again, my name is Bill Foster. I'm actually the president and founder of School Perceptions. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So Rob actually has another school board meeting tonight, so he asked if I could fill in for him, and I said I would do my best. So here we go. Okay, so a little bit about School Perceptions. We're actually a Wisconsin-based company. We have worked in all 50 states, but primarily as it relates to referendum planning, it's primarily in Wisconsin in the Midwest. We have conducted over 10,000 staff, student, and parent surveys. So we do a lot of that work. And we have conducted over 800 community surveys for the sake of strategic planning and referendum preparation. So we've done quite a few. And we were founded in 2002. So maybe it's for 19 years, our mission hasn't changed. We're coming up in 20 years. We help educational leaders gather, organize, and use data to make strategic decisions. So when we started our business 20 years ago, that was our mission, and we're still working towards that goal today. As it relates to tonight's discussion, we're going to talk about our community survey process. And in our world, we asked ourselves the question, why do you survey? Why would you want to do a community survey? And we really broke it into really 5 areas. And in our minds, about half the reason you would do a survey is to educate. You want to educate your community members on the needs of the district. So I was working with a superintendent once, and he said, this is like designing an interactive newsletter. And I thought that was a good description of it. So obviously it's a survey, but there's a lot of information that is required in order for a person to provide a educated response, to explain, to understand what your needs are and what the options are, maybe what the tax impact would be. So the educate's number one. Obviously you do a survey to gather data. Another reason you might do a survey is to establish tax tolerance. While you'd like to do everything, potentially, there is a limit to how much money people are willing to spend. You can look at referendum timing, if and when. And then we like to also collect some basic overall satisfaction metric. There's a lot of research that tells us there's a high correlation between satisfaction and referendum support. So that helps us understand the perceptions of the district. So then what we believe is that people are more likely to support a plan if they understand the plan. So that's the educational component of it, and they have a voice in creating the plan. So if a referendum reflects what the majority of your taxpayers want, by gosh, it's going to be successful. If it doesn't, it's quite likely not to be successful. So that's our goal, is to educate and provide people a voice in creating the plan. So I think the other group you're talking to tonight advocates random sampling. We used to do random sampling probably 15 years ago, but when we really understood the goals, which is to educate everybody, if you leave 90% of the folks out of your survey, you're not going to be educating any of those folks. And our fear is always someone's going to come to your school board meeting and say, well, you didn't ask me, and I want to tell you what I think. So 15 years ago, we switched from a random sampling model to an inclusive model. And what that means is everybody has the opportunity in your community to have a voice. So that's our process. We call it an inclusive process. It's not a random sampling. And then who takes the survey? Everyone has the opportunity. So our model, almost 98% of the time, is to mail a paper survey to every household. When we do a very, very large district, you know, like a Racine or someone like that, we'll actually do a sampling, but it'll be a very large sampling, like 20,000 of the 80,000 households or something like that. For a community like yours, we would quite likely recommend mailing to every household. It's a paper survey. And then when folks get it, they can open it up, they can read it, and think about it. When they take the survey, they can take it online. So we have our own software group here. We write our own software. We've been doing that for 20 years. It's controlled, so nobody can take the survey multiple times. Or if a person wants to take it via paper, there is a business reply envelope provided, so they don't have to even put a stamp on it, and they can mail it in, and we will then process the data. So for tonight's presentation, I wanted to give you some examples of what a survey could look like. And the first disclaimer, I guess, is every survey is highly customized based on the district's unique needs and situations. So there's no two that are exactly the same, but I'll give you some examples of what a survey could look like. The first is there'll be an opening letter, and within that opening letter, there's a call to action. So this is one thing that is pretty consistent from every survey we do. People can go online, enter their unique survey access code, or take it via paper. The other thing we do is support multiple languages, by the way. If people want it in Hmong or Spanish or another language, we've done Russian, a few others, Somali, I guess, recently. So in any event, if you want to support it in multiple languages or would like it done in multiple languages, we can support that. So I just grabbed a couple examples. We just finished a project last fall in Hortonville. And the first part of the survey is an opening letter. And it tells your story. And again, every district's story is a bit, or every district's story is a bit unique. In this case, they happen to be growing. And they're adding some people. They need to add some capacity, and they're asking people to weigh in and help tell them what they should be doing. So that's just an example of an opening letter. Yours would be different. Of course, when you do a survey, you want to gather some respondent demographic information. So you might want to cross-tab your data by things like age. You want to make sure they live in the district. So for instance, if they got a vacation home, they live in the cities, but they got a vacation home in St. Croix, they wouldn't be voting. So we would remove them from the financial support questions. We might want to break it out by your municipalities. We want to make sure that they are employees or not, or if they're parents or not. And by the way, the majority of your community are made up of non-parent, non-staff, they don't work in the district, they don't have kids in the district. That ends up being your largest voting subgroup. And again, I mentioned the point of the survey is to educate. So I just grabbed a couple examples of, in this particular case, they're growing. So we've got school capacity and enrollment growth in a chart. In some cases, you might have a situation where your tax mill rate is dropping and you want to explain that you could do a project and minimize the tax impact of any new spending. I mentioned you might want to use a survey to not only get permission to explore a referendum, but also on timing. This was one we did for Monona Grove that gave two options in terms of how the school could be configured. And I think this is a good example of if you're trying to do this over a telephone, it would just be really hard to explain where the new school would come in and how students would flow from school to school. So there's many, many examples where a visual literally is worth 1,000 words. You just can't explain it over the telephone. So that's why we recommend this inclusive paper survey model. You can also have images. So this one happens to be where this was, Jack Young Middle School. And again, you can see where the additions, the heavy renovation and new construction would go. And then on the bottom, you explain, the question, would you support such a referendum? And then explain what the tax impact would be. Another thing you might want to test is tax tolerance. There's things that people want, but there's a limit to how much money they're willing to spend. So you might want to test from, in this case, 13 to 23 million. And another thing that we sometimes do is explain where that referendum would bring you in terms of relevant tax mill rates. In this particular case, I believe this was Cedarburg. And you can see that if people were to support this, it would bring them back to the 2013 level. So it helps put the response into context. So I think at the end of the day, probably the most important question for the board is this data predictive? And it's highly, highly, highly predictive. We've done over 800 projects. And actually in the state of Minnesota, I believe we're perfect. In the state of Wisconsin, we're probably north of 95% accurate. That doesn't mean you're going to get what you want. It just means the data is predictive. And if you follow the data, you will have success. If you reject the data and go in a different direction, it's quite likely you won't have success. So I just wanted to show you a couple slides of the sorts of data you might get. And again, every survey is a little different. This particular one was a question we're asking, should we consolidate or should we continue to maintain all our schools? Again, we break it out by staff, parents, and non-parent, non-staff, or what we call the purple people. Another thing you might want to do is establish planning priorities in terms of spending. Where should we be spending our money? In this particular case, it came back with maintenance was most important, outdoor athletics was the least important. Or you might want to test, and at the actual question, this is how we report our data. We like to ask against that. Definitely yes to definitely, or definitely no response. And this is just an example I put in so you could see what a tax tolerance question would look like when it comes back. And again, we've done over 800 of these, so we were pretty good at interpreting this data for you if you went down the road of asking a tax tolerance question. And I believe that's the end of my short presentation, so I'll open it up for questions from the board.
One thing, so we're comparing apples to apples, Bill. What are the costs?
So our projects are, it depends a little bit on scope, but it's typically $8,000 to $10,000. That does not include printing. So if you've done a newsletter recently, you know, for a district your size, might be around $2,000, $2,500, I'm guessing, plus postage. Postage varies depending on if you have a not-for-profit certificate or not. Most districts do. But that would be extra, whatever your postage would be.
Okay, and you mentioned your success rate. You said perfect, as in 100% in Minnesota?
We have not been wrong in Minnesota, as far as I know. Now, that doesn't mean everybody passed it. There were some that decided to go for more or went when we said they would not be successful. But as far as the predictive capability, it was, I'm not aware of anyone that we've gotten wrong yet.
Question.
So Bill, when you get demographic information, can you sort by likely voters? So one group says if 65% of your voters are seniors without kids, then that's what we want the survey to include. So it's predictive of likely voters. So can you slice and dice your data with that demographic?
Yeah, all our
180% are kids or families with kids, and we know that's not the demographic of the likely voters.
Right. Yeah, so what we do is we typically break it into 3 subgroups: staff, parents, and then your non-parent, non-staff, which is a little different than likely voters, but we know that about 3/4 of your community is made up of the non-parent, non-staff residents. So those are the majority of the voters. The other dynamic that's pretty interesting to think about, and we've been able to prove this out through our research over the years, is the folks who tend to take the survey tend to be very, very likely voters. So for instance, we used to ask, do you normally vote in elections? And it was always between 93 and 95%, or north of 90 anyway. The other dynamic that is probably more important is this concept of, there's actually a guy that wrote a book, his name was Ed Keller, and he wrote a book called The Influentials. And he, from a demographic standpoint, he defines or kind of lays out what the profile of the influential person is. And the influential person is, for instance, when you want to know what restaurant to eat in, what kind of car to buy, or in this case, whether or not this is a good plan in terms of potential referendum. Those are the people who take the survey. They're also the ones that are influencing the perceptions of their neighbors. So they end up being arguably more important than the person who says, I don't know, I don't care, I'm not taking your survey, and I'm not going to vote. Well, those people kind of don't count. So it actually pulls that influential group in that are, and they're not necessarily your friends, but they are the ones that have developed strong opinions, both for and against a potential project. So, so that you've got that dynamic in place, but yes, you also have access, and you can dynamically disaggregate all the data through our software online.
And how do you do anything in your survey that would help us identify, not by name, but how the influentials are leaning?
Well, kind of by definition, the people that take it will be, and we've proven this out over the years, they tend to be the influentials right off the bat. So in a way, you're getting a bias sampling, if you will, of the folks who actually know or have developed an opinion. Those are the ones who take the survey. But at the end of the day, it comes back to how predictive is the data. And I've had people say it's freaky predictive. And we can give you literally hundreds of testimonials of how accurate it was.
Bill, it's Brian here. Just wondering, when you do that, the preferential kind of the ranking,
Mm-hmm.
do you correlate that with the threshold for dollars as well? Because is this a forced ranking exercise? And then you do like a 10 million or whatever, and then it's sort of like, okay, you slice that off at number whatever. Yep. Is that 7 million then?
You're exactly right. Yeah, that's a perfect way to think about it. So there's really two lines on your paper. One is, what is it people want? The other line is, how much money will they give us? And in some cases, there's different strategies, but where those two lines intersect, that then you have to go back to your architect and construction folks and say, we have to reverse engineer a plan or a project, knowing that the tax threshold is 15 million and here are people's priorities. We have to come back with a plan that makes that work. And sometimes that's very hard. But that's part of the, what I call the strategy development. You have to design your survey so that you can get data back. If that's the kind of data you need, then we're going to design a survey to give you that. But that's exactly right. We've done projects where people really, 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 really want a new high school and they just won't pay for it. So guess what? Those two lines don't cross, and therefore that project won't work.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Bill? All right, thank you, Bill. As you know, we're listening to the three different companies tonight, and Peter Leatherman is next. Actually, it's recorded from before. I'll just play it, and then the board's going to discuss kind of the timeline. But I would anticipate probably make a decision by the August 2nd board.
Okay. Yeah. And if you have more questions, just feel free to ring me up anytime.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Good night.
Thank you.
Just need to pull that up. I have
We used school perception before.
not for the survey. We used Morris Leatherman for the 2014 survey. Yep. We've used them for the board survey. That annual one we did for a number of years.
But that was sponsored by Wasbars.
Correct. Yep.
I thought their name was.
So they're all pretty decent at what they do.
And they told them it was different. And this guy was persuasive about how they do it.
Yeah. All right. So Peter Leatherman, Morris Leatherman Company.
And the people that are.
I'll show him. Yeah, I'll also present it. All right. I'll share my screen.
Yourself do this now.
And he's presenting as well tonight. So came up with the idea of let's just record it and we'll play that tonight. So I'll share my screen so everyone watching can see it. All right. Welcome, Peter.
Sounds good. Thanks. Pleasure to be here with you this afternoon.
Okay. So this video is going to be recorded and we're going to play it for the board at the meeting next Monday, the 19th. So I'll turn it over to you.
Super. I'll just kind of walk through the general process that we use and how we go about what we've been doing for the last, my business partner for, I guess, 38 years and myself for 27 years. And kind of, some of the reference looking back to the 2014 survey that we did for the school district on that bond referendum. But, right up front, we differentiate ourselves from other survey companies in that we don't do opt-in surveys. we do randomly selected surveys. Baker Tilly also does this, and it's really important. I strongly recommend one of these processes as opposed to an opt-in option, because the opt-in survey has some intrinsic biases, whether you're using a mail-out or an internet survey. You have the self-selection, and is it important enough to go out and take the time to fill out the survey, as opposed to a randomly selected telephone method where if your phone number is randomly selected, and we make it as convenient as possible for folks to take the call, so that it's not you have to take the phone call and do the survey randomly call. About half the calls are completed via appointment when it's convenient for the person to take the survey, as opposed to when it's convenient for us to give the survey. And that way we can keep the non-response rate under 10%. And then you have all the standards of statistics that apply. You can project the sample to the community as a whole, which is different with an opt-in. I mean, an opt-in survey is much more like a focus group. They absolutely have purposes, but you cannot say much beyond the fact of what the results are for those that chose to participate in that opt-in survey. And so the process that we use a mix of landline, and since 2007, I guess 14 years ago, we started including cell phones into the mix, and determined through random selection who the phone calls are going to be targeting, and then make every attempt to contact them before we replace them. Our process takes a little bit longer. We're in the field 2 to 3 weeks. Not simply because it's difficult to get people to take a survey, it's difficult to get the person that's randomly selected to take the survey when we want them to. And we don't want to bias the sample against those with an active lifestyle. If we did all 400 calls, we could do it over 2 nights, but you're going to have a sample that is going to be a majority of over 65-year-olds, a majority of women, and you're going to bias it, especially for school district, in a very bad way, in the sense you're going to underrepresent households with children and those with a more active lifestyle. So, the process typically starts of once the district decides they want to contract with us. Have a conversation with whoever the key stakeholders are in the district to establish what the parameters that you're looking for in the current or the upcoming April election. And it sounds like potentially an operating request would be on and a bond request. What sort of specifics are you looking at? And then formulate the survey from there. I will say this, I can already see, going back to the 2014 survey, that was a concentrated, what we call a brush fire survey. Basically had, the idea of what the plan was, we just basically tested the plan. So I do envision that this next survey is going to be longer. You have an operating levy potential request in. And I also think, in light of everything that's happened over the past 16 months, it's really important to understand what the atmospherics are in the school district and to look at some of the larger macro perceptions. Perceptions like financial credibility, involving the community, satisfaction with decision making, on trust, all of those big picture, because on election day, you want people to walk into the voting booth and make a simple cost benefit analysis. How much does this cost and what are we getting? And not bring any of that baggage. The pandemic has created a lot of baggage for school districts. And so it's important to understand where the community is at with their feelings about the school district. And then also you have 2 failed elections this past April. That also can impact atmospherics in the district. So we need to understand, and I would recommend a few questions on the survey about, did you vote this past April? How did you vote? If you opposed, why did you oppose? Is it simply the timing was wrong in working with school districts this spring? It's been a difficult environment. And oftentimes it's not that people don't support the school district, it's that they can't afford to support the school district. They want to, but they can't. Or there have been, a lot of symbolic no votes. They were upset about how a district handled, hybrid or distance learning or what have you over the course of the past school year. And so it really is important to tap in. So I can already say I would recommend probably an additional 20 questions simply based on looking at those global atmospherics in the district. And then it's going to be a little bit longer than also because we're going to go beyond the bond and look at operating under requests. So I would envision, well, the survey of 14 came in at 33 questions. I would think that this is going to be closer to 60 in order to be more comprehensive and give you the fuller picture in order to give the district, be able to give the district the best strategic advice on how to move forward in the future. Our costs are based on two things: how many people we talk to and how many questions we ask them. And so not knowing the exact number of questions is always kind of difficult to give, this is how much it costs. Going through the process, we arrive at a number of questions. But I could say, I would recommend a 400 sample at this point. 400 is plus or minus 5%, 95 out of 100 cases is the statistical caveat. That also, the larger sample size also will be able to allow us to get a significant percentage of likely voters in a special election. And that's the difference between a general election when you're looking at a gubernatorial or a presidential year where everybody votes in Wisconsin versus a special election where the percent is much less. And so we have 3-4 questions in a survey that we ask up front and to ascertain and then categorize likely voters, so we can look at differences in the community as a whole versus likely voters. So with that parameters, I would say a 400 sample, 60 questions at the outset, it would not exceed $15,000. If there are additional questions that we add to it, it's $150 each question, but it might come in less. And so if we're at 55 questions, you're going to save about $750. It's just, that's kind of to give you an idea of ballpark at this point in time. So, like I mentioned, we do the drafting process with the stakeholders, and that really is basically a back and forth until everybody in the district's comfortable with the questions we're asking. The key, what you hire us to do is to write for questions. I can write a question to elicit whatever answer you want, but it doesn't help if makes it, especially if it educates people on the survey. It gives them pieces of information that not everybody has. You've now made them atypical respondent, and they don't reflect the community as a whole. So my job is to write a neutrally worded question in order to get you the best data possible. Once we have the survey all set up, the phone calls, depending on the time of year, right now during the summer, we keep the survey in the field for about 3 weeks to catch people on the front back end of vacation. And this summer, there have been a lot of vacations. It seems like everybody's gone right now, making up for last year. During the school year, it typically takes about 2 weeks to do the calls. From that point, 2 weeks to code a date enter. So I always tell clients in the ballpark, by the time you give sign off and say the survey looks great, to the time that you have the results and I'm ready to come out and present to you and we can write the report, it's typically 4 to 5 weeks depending. And then I tell clients then also from that point on, we don't charge an hourly fee. My business partner set the parameters long ago that if we're there for takeoff, we're there for landing. And so that we consult on a regular basis whenever necessary. And depending on how the environment changes, this survey will probably help set what those guardrails are, what the district should consider. With the caveat, as everything we've seen over the last 16 months, it may be necessary. We have a lot of school districts going this fall. And when they were doing all the data this spring, it's going to be a different world in the fall. Knock on wood, hopefully a more positive world. But things change, and it might be necessary to do the smaller fresh fire type survey that you did back in 2014. That's costs much less. It's much shorter, much more concentrated. If there are some large macro issues that are impacting the current environment. So I think with that, I would ask if you have any questions.
Maybe one would be knowing what you know about, the two questions we asked, and we anticipate being very similar. Which survey would you recommend? The more comprehensive one was 60 to get the macros for the brush fire, and then the timing about, knowing that we want to go to referendum in April, we got to have a resolution passed end of January. But when would be the timing of that survey?
I would recommend that you wait till after the special election season of November this year. I would have the data. I would make the calls. I'm sorry, let me just turn the phone off here.
No problem.
I would say make the calls in November, have results ready by the middle of December, so that the decision makers, I hate presenting a survey and then everybody have to make a decision, that night or something like that. It gives you some time to digest what the information's telling you. The only reason I would recommend going earlier is if there are any known issues in the district or perceived issues in the district. The survey, especially those atmospherics, can help capture that, and the district can take some action, some communication effort around what those issues are. But I do recommend the atmospherics, especially in light of everything we've seen over the last 18 months and in light of the failed referendum in April, just to see where the district as a whole is and how they're feeling about the school district. I mean, my guess is, the biggest driver we've seen during the pandemic and failed referendum is the financial situation of the household. And so it becomes, like I mentioned earlier, not that they don't want to, it's that they can't afford to. But there have been some districts where there have been some symbolic no-votes. They don't like the decisions the district has made. So it really is important to get your finger on the pulse and just to understand where that is on a macro issue, because it will and can filter down to a micro issue on what their voting behavior would be in here.
In my notes here from the Baker Tilly presentation, I had something about prep voter file and I can't read my writing, something structure. It was like a separate package or fee or service they provided. Does that ring a bell?
I think they do some sort of voter profile where they look at registered vote. I'm not quite sure how they do that. We don't, that's very tactical. We tend to remain strategic, looking at that. In an off-year election, the key is going to be to make the right decision on what you're asking for. And then it is to establish a vote yes committee in the community, and then work with them from the survey data, looking at the key areas of demographic support. And you kind of merge those two together. It's much more of a macro look instead of a micro looking at the voter profile.
So do you do that when is it completely random, or you try to match demographics? Say that our registered voters are 30% or 65 plus or something like that. Do you try to get enough surveys till you get 30% of the 400 surveys to match that demographic or not?
It's we go about it a different way. What we do is we look at updated census data because, we still by April, hopefully we'll have updated census information from the 2020 census by April of 2021. Yeah, fingers crossed. But the Census Bureau does updated, they call it the American Family, their American Community Survey, every year with updated looks at the demographic makeup of 20 communities across the country. And so we look at that and establish, so we understand that, 30% is, or over 65-year-olds, 30% have kids, what have you. What we do is we monitor the sample as we're going through to make sure that we're within the plus or minus of that. And, the few times it tends to happen in the summer when we get underrepresentation of households with children, that we start screening. But it's not, the voter file in and of itself, I have much more experience with Wisconsin voter files than Minnesota, or with Minnesota voter files than Wisconsin voter files. But in looking at those voter files, it might not be the most accurate. I mean, the last voter, I opened a voter file from a district here in Minnesota a couple months ago, and they had a woman whose birthday I believe was June something of 1892. I had not to rely on those sorts of things to establish demographics. I tend to look at the census, establish the quotas, and then monitor it so that we're within the parameters of the plus or minus 5%, let's say, of the 400 sample that we would do for the school district.
Interesting. Okay, good information. Yeah. And then I know last time, working with Morris Leatherman, you guys were pretty much spot on with everything. What's your results? That's it. That's it for the relevant stuff. Then we can start chatting and some other stuff. So I think for tonight's presentation,
How much was Baker Tilly? Were they like 25 grand?
19,750. I think I have my notes in my office,
19,750.
and they were less surveys, 350. Right,
$79 per interview plus the other stuff, so it was 19,750. Yeah.
or 300 or 350, I believe it was. So if you would like, I could put together a spreadsheet with the three companies and the data, right?
250.
250. Costs, whether they're opt-in, whether they're scientific random, check references. I mean, if you want, and then we could bring it back August 2nd, make the decision. I think we do have time. It's not a rush.
I think the importance of doing that is for the people that weren't here.
Right.
I don't, for my purposes, I heard. I got 3-4 papers that are here. Here, 2 of my duties, so I think that would fill it.
And then Brian and I discussed a little bit in preparation for the meeting, you know, open versus closed. I mean, since we talked, I did remember that, you know, it's like any other contract where there's competitive bids, so to speak. We can't go into, it could be a closed session item. Prefer that, and we can talk about references and things like that. Otherwise, if you prefer an open, keep it kind of high level stuff, we could do that. I don't know, what are your thoughts on open versus closed and making a decision on August 2nd?
I don't feel need to go in closed. It just makes the appearance that we're hiding something.
Okay.
So I don't think there's anything confidential. They're all public bids.
All the presentations are public, so.
Yeah.
Okay. So compile that, kind of summarizing the three and the similarities and differences, and then
You're
kind
gonna
of
get references.
compare and contrast. I would recommend relying on Market Johnson and Old Architects and Engineers. So that's, you know, they have a lot of experience doing this and working with
And it
all of
isn't
them.
necessarily yes or no to anyone, but kind of what they got, didn't like, and I almost prefer that than if they blackball one and say, oh yeah, they were terrible. Or I would rather hear, you know, this one was good because, and this one did a nice job because.
And I could certainly check into other references as well. School,
I was
school
wondering if
superintendents. they
yeah,
work
when
with.
you did your superintendents, because if we ask them for references, we're not going to get anybody that's going to say that.
Correct.
So that's why I think if you went to Soups or Market
Okay.
Johnson and said, what do you know if it's done? Use this one, that one, whatever.
I think you have to go to like a Mark Johnson, because when you think about their percentages of success across all of them, right, they're 95+% unpredictable. All of them are, right? So the odds of finding a bad, I mean, you're gonna have to make at least 20 phone calls unless you're lucky, right? To get one, right? Like that. I would say somebody like that has a big sampling is the way to do it, personally.
So is it predictive, not positive?
No, predictive, yeah.
So
And
we
that's-
told you 10 and you tried 15 and it failed, just like, I mean, that was what's predicted.
So after listening to Baker Tilly, and then of course Peter Leatherman first, and then now today, to listen to Bill, I was surprised because he's opt-in, and it's very predictive as well. So I
Part of it is they get a larger sampling size. They probably use a different statistical model is probably part of that.
And I was, you know, that's my question is how do you reconcile the fact that most of your survey, opt-in survey people are people that are active, parents and staff, versus, you know, the true voter demographic. But he said,
I mean, it seems right if you're willing to take, I don't know, if something gets mailed to you, take time to do it, you're probably a voter, I would think. I don't know.
Whether you're for or against.
Yeah, and then if you take the time to fill that out, you'll probably take the time to search it.
So they're assuming they're
The whole
gonna get around
process, so.
600-ish, right, if they do that, so it's 50% more. Right, so if you use like attribute data, like you can do statistical modeling on attribute data, which is like good, bad.
Yeah.
Right, you can do modeling on that, it just takes a significantly higher sample size to get the same data, right? So they're saying they would do like 50% more. So it's probably how you actually get there.
Okay.
And it's gonna be hard to argue with their statistics because numbers don't really. They're what they are.
so going
We have
on
history
that.
with one as well, right?
Yep, it was spot on. That's kind of.
But that was a flash.
I was a
We
much
did
fire,
the
about
brush
33
fire.
questions. But yeah, we tested the plan. We developed the plan through the community task.
And his timing, we better have the plan pretty much in place by the time he wants to do the survey.
Yeah, it seems like November's kind of late.
That's
It's just-
We don't have, if we can't use the data much to shape the.
You don't get to, I don't know.
The global atmospheric.
Well, he's doing
questions.
neutral though, right? So he's doing, you just have inputs to him
Right.
and then he shapes it based on the way people respond. So you don't have to have a plan per se.
Yeah,
We just
could
need
do it.
options.
Yeah, we could do it earlier if the committee could use his influence.
And I'm meeting with Mark and Johnson tomorrow as well as the discuss in more detail to the community task force and the timing and the survey. And
I
I'm
wonder
trying to
if-
mesh all this together.
His admonition of waiting till the election.
Yeah, see, he was, I think, more reference to Minnesota because we don't have a
We have a
number.
special election. Well, when we do,
I didn't think it's gonna
November
be a
general. We don't have a November
huge
general.
politically polarizing fall election. So I think that
Timing is key, like last year when we did it over Christmas break, when it was Christmas break and the tax bills had just come out and, you know, all those things. It was not the best time.
Overwhelming.
but if you waited, if it was November, what, 2022, I mean, we're talking April 2022, right? So
Yeah,
if you wait till November, that would be midterms. So,
No, he was saying November of this year to
yeah,
do this.
I know, that's why I just think it all seems, I mean, we're all talking about it now, but we don't, the surveys are going out then, and just, that's when people think that we're thinking about it.
right.
You know.
That was the perception, is that
So,
you waited so late.
And how many meetings do we have after that November? You know, we're planning our task force, only
I think we
two
had two after
after.
that.
And I'm sure he could do it earlier.
Yeah, I mean, you can have a conversation after the second with
Anyway.
whoever we end up with, right? I mean, everybody seemed similar, right? I'm assuming the other one was 6-ish.
time
weeks.
frames, yeah.
So I mean, everybody's 4 to 6 weeks. So from the 2nd of August, we have time.
I'm curious what the Market Johnson would say.
Okay, well, I'll gather that then and have it.
I mean, we have good experience with one of these.
So the mail one, you have no control. Once it's out there, you can't gather what you had asked, I think, was, so you want the 35% of voters of the 65 and older, and they can move that around, right? Like you search.
If they have the
those people
demographic
then.
within their survey, they could slice and dice it.
Whereas the mail ones, it's out of your control with what percentage.
So, but he said that you could slice and dice and see how
Well,
the,
you collect.
And 65
You can
without
screen,
kids.
yeah, so you can call them and say, hey, we're looking for.
Oh, or
no,
you're
no,
talking
I'm
mail.
saying that
Well, I'm
in the
just looking at
mail out
both.
one.
Yeah.
They would know how
Forget
many,
demographics.
you'd already know the demographics of the way they responded, so then you just slice the database on the
Gotcha.
demographic, because they did that bar chart of that,
So there's-
the respondents, like the size of the bar chart there.
So they could actually do their general method, which is just statistical preference versus take your data and screen it for likely voters in the percentages of these demographic care and see if it's any different than what they said for the overall. My guess is it won't be very much different. That's what they do. That's the way they do it.
I know we're gonna discuss it later, but the one thing is on that paper is it's a really good communication tool though. Right, I mean, there were graphics on there were charts on there was tax implications on there. Like there was a lot of stuff as far as communication out about what does this question really mean versus just asking something verbally over the phone.
But to me, those are two separate things. But if
Yeah.
the board says we want it to be a survey and a communication tool, then that's probably the way to go. If
Yeah,
they want
that's
it
what I'm
to be-
saying, like that was
yeah.
the big difference between the two styles.
Yeah, one needs to, we're not in education. That creates a biased voter. If you skewed,
Yeah, it's
you're
truly
truly
scientific.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, okay.
Good.
Anything else?
They're important.
I mean, it's good to have options.
Yeah.
Next, financial reports.
Okay. So the bank balances as of June 30th, 2021. Citizen State Bank checking is $3,267,553. The Citizen State Bank money market is $5,008. Citizen State Bank Money Market Fund 46 is $53.07. Citizen State Bank Money Market Suicide Prevention, $16,502.53. And with the total balances of $3,289,108. $3,289,108.68.
Need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Right?
Opposed? All right, next on the agenda, consideration of consent agenda, approval of the minutes, the St. Croix Central School Board meeting, June 21st, 2021. Approval of bi-monthly bills for July 2021. Approval of resignations and retirements, Brian Meyer, 1 FTE, third grade teacher. Vicky Berkmans, 1 FTE assistant cheerleader head coach or cheerleader coach. Adam Newton, 1 FTE middle school head football coach. Approval of appointments and contract modifications. Patrick Flandrick, 1 FTE head boys soccer coach. Ian Porton, Mr. Port, 1 FTE C team girls basketball coach. The kids had Mr. Porton for school a bunch, so. Matt Langman, 1 FTE middle school head boys basketball coach. Richard Dilcher, 1 FTE varsity assistant wrestling coach. Cheyenne Demlin, 1 FTE third grade teacher. Ashley Johnson from 7.5 hour elementary sped para to 6 hour middle school general education para. Sierra Mondre, 7.75 hour middle school sped paraprofessional. Holly McKeever, almost did MacGyver on that. 8 hour elementary art para level 2. Ashlyn Fry, 7.5 hour high school sped paraprofessional. Ron Seiler, transition from 1 FTE C team boys basketball coach to 1 FTE JV boys basketball coach. And finally, David Linsmeyer from 1 FTE middle school assistant cross country coach to 1 FTE varsity assistant cross country coach.
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
It's Ron Seiler, lawyer, Ron Seiler.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We're definitely still a CP coach or.
CBA,
Yeah.
forever and ever.
Yeah, he's a good guy. Does he live in our district?
He does.
Office in Richmond.
So you can see, obviously, staff's been busy. This is certainly the hiring season. Still have some more positions to fill, but we'll have some more at the next board meeting.
Jen said wage and benefit, like 6 open positions.
Where it is.
More than that, if you include the support staff.
But 6 teacher,
Yeah, I think something like that.
which seems late in the season for me, but it works.
Yeah, but it's a kind of domino effect there. Just at the point of clarification too, the 8-hour elementary art para-level 2, it's a unique situation. I should speak to Jason Rohde's resignation left that opening. Not a lot of applicants. This person is just finishing up her schooling and has to student teach. So that's why it's for this year 8-hour elementary or para, because you can't have it doesn't have a teacher's license yet. Working on it, but it's also level 2, the category we created last year, I believe it was, or about a year in now. Level 2 paras are ones that have full, they teach and have much more planning responsibilities, and it's their classroom, so to speak, so it fits there. So
will she receive it at the middle of the year then, or?
she actually finishes some more classwork this fall. Student teaches in the spring, which she can do concurrently as part of her job. And then, yeah, next spring she would graduate and receive her licensure over the summer.
Is that what we've done in the past?
Not it's pretty unique for that, I think, especially temporarily, but kind of a sign of the market right now.
Okay.
And I think an art position is a little more unique, and
Yeah,
there's not a lot of people that specialize in that.
correct.
I mean,
So who's her supervising teacher then? She doesn't have to have one.
She does not for that. No, she will when she student teaches. I'm pretty sure she has the supervising teacher from UWRF, and then she'll have a cooperating teacher here in district. I don't think this, I don't want to misspeak.
It's
That's a
the
term.
same situation as the computer lab, right?
Similar in that, but that's been a permanent thing. This is more temporary for 1 year. Yeah, very similar. She's a level 2.
It falls into their specials, it seems.
Yeah,
So the expectation that when she gets certified, she'd stay as a teacher, or she has to apply again, or?
it's to be determined, but I think right now, yeah, if things work out well, she would just have to come back to the board for approval, but
Yeah.
I'm going on a limb guessing what interview is agreed.
That's the expectation, that she's gonna be of that quality.
Yeah, yeah.
good. Next, administrative reports, discussion regarding COVID mitigation plan for 2021-22 school year.
Yeah, just wanted to give a oral kind of my thoughts and make sure we're on the right track before bringing back a formal plan for consideration and approval August 2nd. So over the summer, obviously, continued our weekly meetings with the county public health and area school districts in St. Croix County, their superintendents and health staff as well. There's certainly a trend towards far less restrictions as far as COVID mitigation strategies. So just want to give you some of the highlights of what I'm drafting for the plan and the administrative teams to bring back for August 2nd. First of all, masks would continue to be optional, just like we currently are. Another big change would be, although we'll identify close contact, which is 3 feet, 15 minutes or more, will not require close contacts to mandatory isolation. It would just be an FYI, hey, you were close contact with somebody that was positive, be hyper vigilant and just be aware, watch for COVID symptoms and stay home if you're sick type of thing. So it'll be an FYI versus a mandatory isolation. We would, however, right now we're thinking we would still require a household close contact quarantine. In our experience the past 16 months, 95% of our positive cases have come from the household. So that would be what we're thinking right now to present August 2nd for that. As far as disinfecting surfaces and the extra disinfecting we did, now the latest research shows that it's very ineffective, not worth the time or the money and the effort. So we would cease the extra disinfecting, Greg Green's staff. We still have plenty of hand sanitizer that would make readily available, of course. In terms of food service, talking to Tammy Simon, saying it'd be pretty much business as normal, with a few little changes in that automatic ketchup and ranch dressing dispensers, right? So you're not pressing and pumping and doing all that, but it'd be back to self-service. Still working out details as far as I haven't got the answer to whether we're going to recommend assigned seating at lunch and all that, but that's to be determined yet this next week. As far as drafting the plan, as far as transportation, The assigned seating worked well. Brian recommends continuing that with assigned seating and by family group. It helped with discipline as well. And then would drop twice per day disinfecting of the buses with the big sprayers through it after each route to once per day. Again, more in terms of mitigating just cold and flu and other germs, or that's not super effective for COVID specifically, but just good hygiene.
Those electrostatic sprayers.
Yeah. Yeah,
And you already have the
yeah,
equipment.
already have that. Yeah. So that's the kind of the general overview from memory and what I'm drafting for the plan. And am I, just wanted, here's the other part. So the county, of course, says here's the CDC data and recommendation. They're still saying masks and isolation are effective. So does Wisconsin DHS. But they understand that, most stakeholders just don't have the appetite to continue those aggressive mitigation strategies. So they're, they understand and they're not opposed to whatever school plans are, just continue to communicate. So I wanted to make that known too, that we're in communication. They understand that we might not be totally aligned with CDC and Wisconsin DHS, but they understand the needs and wishes of our community stakeholders too. So all the area superintendents are pretty much doing a very, very, very similar plans to what I just mentioned.
I know you were in close contact, which was words with the county. Do you anticipate that regular report interaction would continue?
I've anticipated that, yes, continue this summer and at least through the start of school. And yeah,
So
I mean,
if
it's an hour
something
once a week.
changes, if something changes, we can tweak or.
Correct.
How about sports?
Right now, the WIA hasn't released any fall guidelines, but the word is, that it's very similar. They're not going to require masks or very restrictive.
No limit to attendance.
So they're not interested in kind of like being in place of communities, right? They did release this month just some guidance and information on the vaccine. And I think it was in line with, hey, if you've been vaccinated, you don't need to isolate, just kind of what the CDC guidelines were.
MIAC is considering requiring all students to be vaccinated. All of MIAC schools are considering mandatory vaccination.
Really? And we are not interested in the state is made, information for schools to be vaccination clinics and or testing clinics, and said we're not interested. We'd like to keep the health things to the health professionals and focus on education as much as possible. So am I any opposition? Just want to make sure I'm on the right track drafting that plan. And so bring it back August 2nd for consideration so all stakeholders can know.
It's close to it was in 2019, 2020. That's the best. So.
I think this one.
Our county has a 7-day rolling average of 2 for like well over a month now. So
Yeah.
So area by area, we're.
The peak was last November,
Yeah.
mid-November.
It doesn't seem to, because you're watching stuff go up in other places, but it seems to stay the same around here. So.
Nice job navigating through chaos this last year.
And then we did discuss today, just going through the agenda, right, around whether or not to vote on it or whatever. But it's probably cleaner that we vote as a school board, and if we have to do anything to change, we'll have to put something in there if we need to do something.
Without us voting so last year's rules kind of just, they expired, right?
Yeah.
So with nothing, we just go back to business as normal?
Well, that's a great point, but I forgot that piece. So part of our ESSER funds,
Yeah.
form today, they require you to update your plan, your reopening plan, they actually still call it,
Okay.
every 6 months. And then there's also a piece where we have to gather stakeholder input as part of ESSER 3. And board meetings are a great piece of that, and we may have to do a survey as well.
Do we have an idea when they quit making us update that every 6 months? Or-
Well, we can claim ESSER funds through September 2024. That's round 3. I think ESSER 3, they said.
EV, I think ESER two is through
So we may
September
have
of
to.
23.
Right, there's always.
Just jump through some hoops, yeah,
with
whatever.
federal.
But it can be, I mean, you can have no plan to be a plan though too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
Right, yeah, the plan's updated, no changes.
yeah, we're gonna continue or whatever it is, but
So to Brian's point, yeah, the prefer we do it like we did last year. The board considers it, makes a more motion on it, but you know, you can say contingent on, allowing for the administration to make, real-time changes if things change drastically or something.
Yeah, because today Mr. Soderberg had sent out an email about the orientation and that they'll use lockers. I mean, so it sounded pretty normal at the high school anyways. They kind of released what it looked like, so.
We understand there's really no appetite for continuing
Like,
And there's no
You know,
real evidence that
the restriction.
emergency has exploded COVID.
Correct, right? Trying to reach that balance, and we're just not seeing, like you said, 2 cases per week in the county.
yeah,
County.
of the 90,000 people.
And we had one, FYI, one during summer school. And again, that was a household contact. So that's a positive trend as well.
are you gonna maintain updating anything on the website? I'm assuming
I
not.
wasn't planning on it just because it's really
Okay,
kind of, yeah,
Yeah,
irrelevant. I
but-
mean, it's not impactful enough.
that's what I was gonna recommend, is
Okay,
not spending your
thank
time
you.
on that. So I was hoping that was the answer. Okay.
Did we have a lot more, I mean, obviously we probably did a lot more absences last year then, or like way more than normal? Because when you got traced, that counted as an absence, which I thought was kind of crazy, but.
Yes, because of that. Yep.
So,
We didn't have the flu though,
No,
at all.
Do we still do the 100% attendance club? We dropped
We
that.
we got that last year. Monthly perfect attendance drawing and, yes.
Yeah, come sick.
Well, I mean, just in general though, I mean, that's made enterprises and companies talk about that, right? About rewarding special, like perfect attendance and not. Just because people come in with the flu. They're like, oh my gosh, I felt horrible this morning. I took 2 Advil, 2 Tylenol and like whatever, cold and flu. And I'm like, okay.
there's a $50 gift card in the
Certificates.
Like, come November through February, I was always like, oof, don't touch anything. Just for that, I'm just like, what are you doing here? So, yeah, so that might be something that, okay. Next, the keyword for school board, discussion on future district needs and priorities.
Just in line, all the things we've been discussing, obviously, they're selecting a survey company to run that. Also the facilities community task force, a kind of tentative timeline. Again, I'm meeting with Wold and Market Johnson tomorrow. One of my follow-up questions is Wold said they were gonna do that flyer, that the marketing piece that we can send out, say, here's the community task force meetings and you're all invited, et cetera, so people can commit to that. So I'm gonna inquire on the status of that tomorrow, but that would be, I think, the next concurrent important piece is getting that advertised out and get the community task force together. And then first August 2nd, make the decision on that and try to align the timelines with all of that.
They got it someplace. I might have it someplace too, but twice successful referendums, we did 3 mailings that each were a different color.
I have them,
And they're like trifold things, so they had lots of data
blue and yellow.
and things. They were a Q&A format, like, well, what happens if the referendum fails? It's like, hey, we'll still educate your kids best we can. World's not gonna come to an end.
Yep.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, I've got all those.
I think,
a whole folder.
I think that
File
we
cabinet.
need to get lots more information, however we do it. And that was so, I mean, there's a lot of reading, but you couldn't say we didn't give you information, the postcards.
And they were more simple, right? Didn't have all
Yeah.
fancy
No,
color
they were
graphics,
just-
right? That got confused with political flyers and postcards
they were
and stuff. And yeah, they just were,
Be mimeographed in my day.
yeah. I think it was blue colored paper,
It had blue and
cardstock and yellow one.
yellow one.
And I don't remember what the third color was. I went back to a yellow,
Yeah, agree.
maybe. There you go.
Oh,
Green.
yeah.
Color palette.
You can do a focus group. on
Study
which
on the
color
level
we
of
want.
things here, right?
Looks like green and blue.
No, purple.
I think I should skip this.
Purple and gold.
Okay.
All right. All right, consideration of approval of annual notice, that's exhibit 12B.
This is the smallest print I've ever seen.
Yeah. Can't do that.
Font size.
Her spreadsheet is
No, it's
huge.
less than that.
Is it?
It's probably 4.
And these are on, the current ones are on the website, and these ones will be posted. Any changes you see there, but it's kind of an FYI, it's an annual thing. It's just, we're hired by a lot to do.
It's just good to know that somebody's trying to keep track of all these things.
Do we need approval on this, Kelly? Yeah. Or
So moved.
Second. Do you get that, Jeff? And then Vince, do you get that?
Yes.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried, or approved, I guess. Next, consideration of approval of notice identifying pupil academic standards in math, science, reading, writing, geography, and history for the SCC school district for the 2021-22 school year. Exhibit 12C.
annual requirement on the website as well. Does need approval.
Anything controversial?
There is no moved. Any changes?
Got a motion?
Second.
Yep, second.
Let's go, Leverage.
All right, all those in favor? Signify by saying aye. Opposed? All right, approved. Next, consideration of approval of notice identifying pupil academic standards in math, science, reading, and writing, geography, and history for St. Croix Central Virtual Academy for the 21-22 school year, exhibit 12B.
So moved.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Approved. All right, on to core agenda items. Review of proposed 2021-22 budget levies to be presented at the annual meeting. Handout 13A.
You should have the annual meeting packet in front of you. We're gonna start on page 10 with the budget information. Gonna go back through and cover some of the other stuff. It's always good to have you guys look at it. So we did end on June 30th of this year with our fund balance right at 17%. We did have to put $290,000 into our fund balance to maintain that 17% because our expenditures increased quite a bit from the prior year. And
Does
if you-
everyone know, like, there's a reason that we hold that? Like,
Yeah,
just
we
bringing
should
that
explain
up.
Yeah, so that's our GASB 54 fund balance policy. And so,
Board policy, correct?
yes, it is. It's been approved by the board. So the policy states that we will maintain a 17 to 19% fund balance. And if it dips below 15%, then we have to come up with a plan to restore it back to that 17 to 19%. So that is our current policy for our fund balance.
It's really important if and when we do referendum, that the bond community will give us a better rate if we have that in place.
Being in compliance of our fund balance policy and actively working to maintain it at that level. A lot of other districts do have higher fund balances than we do, but we seem to do okay between that 17 and 19%. So we have kept with that. Usually, I mean, the reason to have a larger fund balance would be so that you don't have to short-term borrow as much. And we're actually going to talk about that too a little bit later tonight on increasing the amounts that we can borrow during the year. But it seems like the 17 to 19% works pretty good. Our interest costs are usually under $500 a year. They were a little bit more this year just because we did end up borrowing at 3 different occasions during the year, December, March, and June. So it was a little bit more than normal. And it was kind of the way payrolls hit compared to when we receive our state aid payments. And then with our debt service and the amounts that we're levying there. So
So general reference GASB 54 line, whenever we're talking about the fund balance. So GASB stands for,
Governmental Accounting Standards Board, and 54 just means it's the 54th rule that they've published. So I think now we're on 90 something. I can't even remember. I think I heard 93 was the latest one.
and how much did you put in to maintain it again, Jen?
This year was about 290,000.
Yeah, so that, you know, it's a big number, right? But to Jeff's point, if we ever have to go to, you know, for bonds, Standard & Poor comes out and does this rating and a bunch of research and things. But I remember the last time, because we have that policy and we follow it and we're in compliance with our own policy, that really helped our rating, which doesn't give us more money to spend on kids, but it does help, obviously, the taxpayers, because our interest rate on those 20-year bonds, you know, as you saw, like 3%.
It was like 50, it saved us like 50 basis points, 0.5%.
Way back then even, yeah. So important to be financially healthy.
Absolutely. So next year, because we're not anticipating our expenditures to increase as much, we should only need around 90,000 to add to our fund balance to maintain that 17%. So the budget that we're proposing includes that. I'm just going to hit some of the highlights. So if you guys have any questions along the way, just blurt them out. So going into revenues to start, our local sources, source 210, our levy amount for 21-22 is based on a flat September FTE and returning to the normal summer school FTE. So if you remember last summer, because of COVID, we didn't really have summer school. We had very minimal things going on. So we only had 4 FTE associated with that, where normally we would have more like 20 to 21. So this budget includes that increasing back to 21 FTE. And then of course, in September, when we have our third Friday count, we will have our actual student count, and then we will apply that when we set the levy. So these numbers will change a little bit between now and then. Our 3-year rolling average is increasing anyway because of the number, you know, we're dropped off the lowest year, and now last year was a little bit higher. So it will increase from 1609 last year to 1624 this year. So that did help us out a little bit too. The actual per student amount, from what I am reading, is not increasing. And the state is saying that we are to use our COVID SO2 and SO3 dollars to fill in the gaps, which is concerning because those are one-time dollars that we're using for expenditures that are going to be further. On July 1st, DPI published our aid estimate at almost 13 million, 12,889,301. So that is about a 6% increase from the previous year. And again, we get the certification on October 15th. And so once we set the levy in October, we'll plug in all those final numbers, and then we'll have that. Source 280 I wanted to point out just because it was such a drastic difference from 1920 to 2021. That's the interest that we're earning on the money that we have in our accounts. And as you can see, interest rates just kept plummeting throughout the year. So we went from about 41,000 in 2019-20 to less than 2,000 in 2021. And we're expecting that to continue, unfortunately. Our open enrollment is the next one I'm going to touch on, and that is source 340. If you remember, we kind of talked about this as the preliminary budget, that we're anticipating that we will have a lot of students that signed up for virtual charter school because of the pandemic that will be going back to in-district and in a classroom seat. So I've kind of left the budget at what it was. DPI will increase the actual amount for each that we will receive for each student. They haven't published that yet, so we don't know what that is. But I'm kind of hoping that that will offset the reduced number of kids and then it'll kind of be very similar to what it is this year. Of course, as we get closer to school, then we'll know a lot more about that. If we skip down to source 750, that is where we are adding in our ESSER and ESSER 3 dollars. So in 1920, we had about $32,000 that we received in federal funds. Last year, it was $65,000. That was including the $40,000 worth of the ESSER 1 money. And now in 21-22, that will include half of our ESSER 2 and half of our ESSER 3 allocations. We do still have a portion of ESSER 2 that it hasn't been allocated yet, so we're not sure what's going on there. And did you hear anything more at the state level, Tim?
I did today from CISA Connie and Melissa Moe.
Okay.
There was a ESSER 2. Again, this is all speculation, but it was like 358,000 is a weird number per pupil for ESSER 2 target, and then like 700 and some for ESSER 3. But it's such speculation; it's really not helpful.
Yeah.
And again, Jen's point about ESSER 2, what we do know, right, it was that discretionary funds. The school districts that were in person were to be incentivized and get more than those that weren't. They're ready to release it, and then they're like, oh, we forgot about charter schools, so they're including charter schools as well. They anticipated it didn't make a big difference in our area because there aren't a lot of charter schools here.
Right.
But so the good news, I guess, is like Jen can work with what we have now, but that is pretty much a given going to happen. We just don't know how much.
We have no idea how much that's gonna be. So is that what they were maybe referring to with the extra $120 per student?
Yeah, they did hear that as well on the state call Friday. One of the superintendents said that 120 was a number of per pupil increase as part of ESSER 2, but
Okay. Yeah,
even
like I
the
said,
state leaders were like, we invited them to our meeting today. We're like, we don't have any new information on the 30,000 foot view. So
yeah.
we're all right. All school districts are waiting. We're trying to set budgets.
Yeah, I'm out there every day searching, and there just isn't anything out there. And Eber signed it on July 8th, I think it was.
Yeah.
So it's been, 10, 11 days now, but still no information. So, yeah, so this is only what we know is for certain, I guess is how to put it, as far as the China's the $3 go. Then if we go.
Oh, Jen, I forgot to clarify.
Yeah.
The 120 per pupil, I clarified is over 2 years. So it's $60.
Okay,
Again, the biennial budget, all these numbers are spread out over 2 years.
right. So again, in October, we will know everything and be able to update those amounts based on this current information. Our Title I allocation is increasing as well from about 42,000 to 68,000. So that is based on the poverty level in our district, and it's this big calculation. And so sometimes it can swing up and down quite a bit because we're pretty close to that edge on where either we qualify for another pot of money or we don't qualify for it.
That's a 5% countywide poverty level. So it's not
Oh, it's
our
countywide.
district, it's countywide, and it's a 5%, so that we're always right on that edge. It makes a big difference to go
It
over
does.
5% or under.
Yeah, it can.
That's out of our control.
So if you flip to page 11, you'll notice in the 2021 column under source 870, we have a $361,000 in there. That was for the lighting lease. So when we take on a lease, we have to record it as both a revenue and an expenditure in our books. So that was one of the reasons why our expenditures increased so much last year as well. So overall, we were looking at, in 2021, our receipts increased by about 9.09% when compared to 2019-20. And of course, we also did receive a $300 per student increase last year, which normally we have only seen around $200. So that was the part of the reason that it was so much more, as well as that open enrollment in with the COVID pandemic and students transitioning to that. We're estimating for 21-22 that will be just slightly under a 2% increase in our revenues. Any more questions on the revenue side? Okay, we'll go into expenditures then. So overall, as every year, we've had a lot of staffing changes. I kind of have a list of them, but I'm not sure. I mean, we added about 1, 2, 3, 4 dozen positions or parts of positions during 2021. For 21-22, we are looking at another half a dozen. Most of them are increases from like our grounds crew maintenance. We had a 5.5-hour position that we're increasing to an 8-hour position. So a lot of it is those types of things. We're adding a 0.2 for speech and language, 0.5 for a high school special ed teacher, as well as a virtual charter school sped teacher, 5 for a school psychologist, an additional virtual charter school teacher, and then an additional high school special ed para. So those are kind of things that affect a lot of the different functions that we're going to talk about. And then of course, we also had the 2% salary increase that was approved in April. We will see an 11% increase in our health insurance starting January 1st of this coming year. 5% increase is what I estimated for dental starting January 1st. And then I calculated no increase in vision, HSA contributions, 403B contributions, life, disability, and cash and lieu. So those I estimated a flat increase. The Wisconsin retirement system did recently announce that starting January 1st, the rates will decrease 0.25% for both the employee and the employer. I didn't have time to put that into my budget, but it's not going to be a significant amount of money, probably less than $10,000, because it doesn't start until January 1. So those are things that affect everything. We'll point out a few that are for this year's budget that are kind of sticking out at me. Our vocational curriculum function 130,000 is going up almost 20%. And that is because each June we receive a CTE grant money, and they allow us to roll that over into the next year because we don't really know how much it's going to be. So it's hard to spend it before you know the dollar amount. So we received about 28,000 in June for this CTE grant that we didn't have time to spend in June. So we're rolling that over in the budget for next year and increasing that. So they actually have almost $60,000 sitting there to spend on different CTE programs with this funding that we've received, because it can roll from year to year as well, you know, so we didn't spend a lot last year either. So that was one thing that stuck out at me. Another one was function 170,000, and that is actually decreasing, and it's because we have a new gifted and talented teacher. So the person that was in the position had a little bit more experience in education. Now the new person coming in is a little bit lower, and I think a lot of it is the benefits that they need only single insurance compared to family. So that's going to make a little bit of a difference there. Function 210,000, I'm expecting that to increase about 13%. Part of that is because of the addition of the psychologist. And the other piece is this Masters Plus teaching group that we've been talking about. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about in closed session later. Function 240,000, also for 21-22, includes the additional compensation for the secretarial district office staff, again contingent upon approval during closed session later. So we will go through that a little bit later. Function 250,000 is decreasing. Part of that is because of that lighting lease I talked about, where we had to book it as a revenue and an expenditure in this past fiscal year, so we won't have that in there. And then we did end up delaying the bus leases to August of 22 for those 4 new buses that we purchased. So the first lease payment will be August of 22 instead of this August. Function 260,000 is expected to decrease slightly. We're still gonna have those hotspots that we got over the last year and a half, but we will have reduced phone costs because of that phone audit that we went through. 280,000 is debt services. You'll notice that is increasing quite a bit from 3,700 to 45,000. So that is the first year of our lighting lease. So last year we booked it as a revenue and an expenditure, and 21-22 is going to be our first payment on that. So that gets coded in function 280,000. Let's see, how about 430,000? That's our open enrollment. That is actually decreasing, and it's not because of the open enrollment piece, but the other piece that goes in there is all the curriculum for our virtual charter school students. And so we're expecting that to go down with those students again transitioning back to in-building. So overall, we're looking at expenditures increasing again right around that little less than 2% for next year. Any questions on the expenditures? Okay, we'll skim through the special funds. So Fund 21 and 27 are now combined. Fund 21 being our old Fund 60 accounts that transitioned over, and Fund 27 being special education. So the balance that you see there in the fund balance, the 433,000, is all of the balances in those Fund 21 accounts. Some of the functions are increasing a little bit more due to the additional like psychologist position and some of those that are being added. I think there were 3 special ed positions there. Fund 38 is our energy efficiency debt service payments. So we can levy for that, and then we turn around and pay those payments. Fund 39, this is where when we talk about the mill rate over the past few years and trying to keep the mill rate stable, Fund 29 is almost like our plug figure. So with no increase in that per student revenue limit this year, adding to that levy portion and also receiving most likely some more additional state aid, our mill rate would plummet if we only levied 1.3 million that we're required to levy in Fund 39. But as we've been working with Brian Brewer at Baird and wanting to keep that more stable so that if we can pass a referendum in the spring, that's less impact on the taxpayers. So this 5.1 million will keep the levy relatively stable, considering an 8% increase in property values for this next year.
And when do we learn the property valuation numbers? Is that around October each year?
Yeah, October, early November. Yeah. They've been running closer to 9%, so I thought 8% was pretty conservative.
With all the construction lately, that should be.
Yeah.
Home values in general.
Yeah. And I did talk to Brian Brewer because I was a little concerned to make sure that we had enough debt that we could prepay. And he assured me that that entire refinancing that we did last January was set up with a 30-day notice. So we can prepay any of that with 30-day notice. So it will help us a lot. Fund 40 is our building fund. We started with $50. We've earned a little bit of interest, only 5 cents this last year. Fund 50 is food service. And then Fund 80 is our community service fund. So if we get down to the tax levy, between the general fund, the non-referendum debt, which is our energy efficiency levy, and then our referendum debt and 70,000, which we have continually levied for community service, that puts us at just over 9 million for our levy. And with that 8% increase in property values, our mill rate would be at 10.19 per thousand. It was at 10.20 last year. So that's what we're looking at. If you go to page 13 and 14, it's a summary of the same information, just presented in a different manner. So what we went through was the first week posting in the newspaper, and 13 and 14 are like what goes in the paper the second week for the annual meeting posting. One other thing that I wanted to talk about tonight, because it is a change from what we have done in the past, if you go back to page 2 on the agenda, 7B is to authorize the school board to make temporary loans to meet obligations incurred. And in the past, we have had that at 600,000. It has been at 600,000 for 11 years. And we're finding it harder and harder to, for that to be enough. Usually, like every time we had to borrow this past year, we also had to hold checks anywhere from 250 to 400,000. So I felt like adding, increasing that to 900,000 would make it a little bit easier so that we hopefully don't have to do that. Because I know, like Tina always tells me too, she's like, Jen, they don't care that we're a school. 20 years ago, you could just say, oh, we're a school. And they'd say, okay, that's fine, we can get it to us. But it doesn't really work that way anymore. So that was one thing I wanted to point out. And then, of course, after all of the financial information on page 15, we have our community service summary that we do each year. That has stayed the same as last year. I do have, that because of COVID-19, some of these programs might not be happening as regularly scheduled. We're hoping they do, but I kind of put that in there as a disclaimer. On page 18, we have our energy efficiency utility savings. And so we're required to publish that in the newspaper as well. So that will go in for 2 weeks. And page 19, we have our tax levy mill rate summary. So you can see where we sit compared to other districts in the CISA 11. And then page 20 through 23 are all of our existing obligations for debt service for both Fund 38 and 39. Page 24 is an estimate and history of our equalized values, an estimate for this coming fall and history for the last 20 years.
I always think it's interesting, look at the property valuation. You look back at 2012, 444 million, that's doubled to 890 in 10 years. That's pretty amazing growth. And then obviously the column down there too, the percentages, obviously you can see the housing crash, went down for a while. And just very interesting. I think 9% is very conservative, knowing all the new construction and just the property values. It's like crazy.
Yeah.
Worried it's,
And then just last page being the calendar.
Yeah, but for this year, it's
not this year.
it only makes a difference if you sell them.
That's right.
That's more to do with their evaluation, right?
Yeah, and I'm saying your true value is whatever you're gonna pay for it.
Yeah.
So it can be real or not, depending on buyer.
So we're
It's on paper.
Cause, yeah,
That's what
most of
matters.
these, but most of these, the villages and towns just
Assessed.
did their new evaluation, so we should be good, because they don't do those very often, so. Good.
About every 5 to 10.
Yeah, well, Hammond went 12.
Well, they did.
Yeah, it was 2008, that's why they were so low.
I mean, the big numbers are a farm field turns into 7
Yeah.
houses.
Yeah,
Right.
Right, a
yeah, it went from a $100
$100,000
tax.
house or whatever, yeah, I mean, that's like your big
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the same information we'll go through in two weeks from today at the annual meeting.
Exciting.
Yes. So we just need a motion to approve to bring it forth to the annual meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
How come Webster has such high property value?
Like it's a huge district, 510 square miles, and that's all lake homes.
I know, I looked at the bottom of that
Cabins.
list, I'm like, oh, it's all lake homes
It's- yeah.
area.
The Sutter has lakes.
Look at all the lakes we're getting now.
More, it's getting bigger.
The problem is they're flooding houses, which isn't helping them either.
Yeah, the mill rate is so low.
The Colfaxes, do they have lakes?
No, they have a low mill rate as well.
Yeah, they do. In Durant, Arkansas, which I think is,
Brand,
yeah, it's low.
just because of the deer.
Deer.
Seriously, their properties were a fortune, really.
Really?
Go try to buy 400 acres in Durant.
Yeah,
Yes, you're right.
Mondovi, Durant.
Yes,
yeah.
you're right.
It's like,
You can't.
it's like yeah.
People look,
$5 million or whatever because there are big bucks there.
you're right.
Is
So we just-
is that a planned words?
Why don't we
No, it
watch?
wasn't, but yeah, but you could. That's, I mean, hey, that's the way to get your
You're
property
right.
value down, right? Just like start throwing minerals out for deer.
You do. Scott Trainer.
Need to do more.
Mm.
Okay, so next on the agenda is a Project Mallard discussion. And Tim has been the representative for the school on this one, and like we had a chance to talk a little bit and just like kind of give some context around what we do get to weigh in on what we don't, right? As that stakeholder, because it isn't actually what I thought, right? Big conversation. I didn't even realize what we were able to even, that joint board was able to weigh in on or not weigh in on. So it was educational for me.
Yes, on the joint review, I'm representing the district on the joint review board. Again, just a quick overview, they have 5 people on there, each of the 4 taxing districts, our school district, WITC, county, Sacred County, and then the village of Roberts. So those are the 4. And then they have an at-large person on there to make it odd number for the vote. So Howard represented the district, TIDS 2 and 3. The metal place on his road there.
Sky Meadows?
Okay, no,
No?
it's just south of Howard's there. I can't remember, small,
Oh, Black Diamond.
is that it? It's on, 130th. And then the 18, whatever, the current 18, where those, one there, west of the truck stop. So I had a quick learning curve here to understand some things, but I did include the invite for the joint review board that had information. And I did confirm this with Sean Lentz of Ellers. I said, just help me understand, because I'm still in the information gathering phase. And, I attended the first joint review board meeting last Monday at the Village Hall there in Roberts, and then stuck around for the public hearing as well. So I want to try to understand the concerns of the community and just gathering information, which is hard when there's a non-disclosure agreement. I want to say that, a lot of the answers, other questions just can't be answered. But so again, back to my role in the joint review board and my understanding. So with Sean, I called to clarify. You see on page 2, it says, the joint review board will be asked to approve the resolution to be adopted by the village amending the district, right? So it's all about the TID. So like I said, help me understand, do I understand this correctly? These three questions here, you know, we have to answer, and then if you fail, if we say no, does not meet one of these three questions, then we need to provide a written explanation describing why. Right, so I said, do I understand it correctly? He said yes. There are a lot of things to be considered, right, with this whole project, but in terms of the joint review board, basically, you know, my vote is based on these three things, and we got to answer these three questions. But like I said, well, can you vote no because I don't like it, you know, and it's gonna, you know, potentially change, you know, the culture of our community is on the, you could, but then you'd have to explain why, you know, how does it meet this? So it could go to arbitration and all this. So that's the way I currently understand it. You know, and my takeaway from that meeting is, you know, at best, you know, if it does pass and there's a, you know, a lot of stakeholders that are opposed to it, that we work with, you know, the village and whoever the purchasing company is to address those concerns. That's my understanding, at least right now. It's not like we have any say in what the, you know, Village of Roberts ultimately decides. I do have a say, in the joint review board as one of 5 voting members
On these three.
on those 3 questions. I did go out and do, you know, internet searches and research and trying to understand it, you know, personally as well. And a lot of the concerns brought up at that meeting, very valid. Again, I think, but our one vote on the joint review board as it stands is kind of limited, more limited than I first thought.
You know, if you read them, it's financial, you know, analysis.
Yep.
So that's so smart.
So your view is this is gonna get approved?
I don't feel comfortable guessing, right, speculating, but it's, you know, it's a joint review board. So the timeline is the other part that's still indefinite, and we all asked for more information, and I have yet to see it, but they're gonna publish it on the website. I understood it as to when it's, you know, they wanna do some traffic studies, there's the DOT, there's the municipality of the town of Warren that has to agree to some things with the annexation of the property. So there's a lot of things that have to fall in place. And, you know, they did, the board, at least Willard acknowledged that the timeline that the potential purchaser asked for was very accelerated, like August break ground. Well, I don't see how that's gonna happen. And that certainly would be one of my voices on this, is slow down, you know, get more information, get these things checked out, actually traffic studies and all these things. I don't know what the hurry, again, going fast is, I'm sure most of you agree, is.
The proposed district's just one building.
What's that?
The district's just one building, the district that they're proposing?
No, that map there,
Yeah.
the building would go on that bigger rectangle at the bottom. Okay, I understand it. I mean, it's 1.3 million square feet.
Yeah.
And they could, but yeah, and the other part is some support area. I'm not sure, you know, there's gonna be roads, different roads and lots of infrastructure. And again, that's what TID is intended to pay for. But yeah, there's the Twin Lakes flooding issue. There's people there for that concern. There's the folks about, you know, changing our community, obviously traffic. You know, and they brought up noise pollution and light pollution and then the pollution from the vehicles and the amount of traffic and the damage to the roads and the impact. You know, there's lots of things to consider. Certainly that I hope, you know, the village, making its final decision, takes into consideration. But again, my vote for the joint review board is kind of, and my input is limited to these criteria. It's all financial.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we can't be a voice along the way at those meetings as well. That's what I know.
Did you think that how they could pay it off? It wouldn't have to be 20 years. It could be 10 or 15. There was that comment during that meeting.
Could be sooner.
Right, do you know Does anyone know?
Depends how much money they spend.
Yeah, it depends on the district performs, right?
Well, it depends on, to my understanding, and like at Anderson, we just did one, a big one.
Yeah.
Depending on how much money we spent for stormwater, like all of those things kind of all in, they would weigh that against our projection for the TID district. And then based on when that would be paid back, right? So just to make up numbers, if it's 20 million that we put out there, that we said we were gonna put into stuff, and we spent 14, because of cost of materials, labor, whatever, we found that there wasn't hard paying, whatever, then it would be prorated back, and we'd start paying taxes earlier. That's the way it worked for that one. I don't know all the ins and outs, but that's an example of like when I was on a project where we just did one. That's how that one worked, and the prorating worked for that one.
And it isn't.
It's not gonna be 20
not-
million.
They're not paying taxes, but that money they would have paid taxes is being paid towards the capital improvement.
They are paying the taxes the way Willard explained it, but, you know, they're paying their taxes, but then the village takes that and reinvests it into
towards the
infrastructure. And that's where I think the
So
variable
you
in
don't
time
get the
frame.
benefit as a community member until that's paid out.
But you also don't get, it's sort of neutral to the district.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they get improvements.
We still have $20 million to levy or whatever it is, and it gets levied against how much property value is, and this one basically doesn't count for 15 or 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, like when we did ours, we paid for a whole extra lane, which was brought forward 6 years in their plan, that we paid for the whole traffic lane, the turn lane, extra light, a spur on the railroad tracks, like all of this stuff that other businesses and everything like benefited.
Big wish list or whatever. it is.
But because we're not even gonna use the spur now, but that's a whole different thing. You know, but I mean, there's a lot of stuff like that that we paid for that we're not using yet, right? That benefits the traffic on that road out there for ours. So I'm assuming it's similar, right? At capital infrastructure.
Certainly changing character of the community.
And just like, again, the attorney, but we are elected officials, right? So we do have some things that like we just have to be a little bit careful and stuff in that capacity.
So I'll keep you updated as I learn more. Again, I don't know when the next meeting is, or that's all to be determined yet.
I don't use Exit 10, so it won't impact me that much, but man, trucks with ton of material and.
And once 1880 becomes operational,
It's.
1880, putting on 600,000 square feet of a cross-docking facility. All you do is move from one trailer to the other. That's the business model, right? That's already committed to without a ton of improvements. Like that traffic's going to be
For
significant.
every truck that leaves with stuff, a truck has to go and
Yeah,
get stuff.
yeah.
Just like a residence isn't one household vehicle, it's mom and dad going back and forth at least once a day to work. So it's 4 moves. So it's interesting.
I mean, at some point, it's going to be something. And that isn't to say if we're for or against. It's like draw a radius around Minneapolis, St. Paul. Take the fastest road to Chicago. Something will come eventually. And again, it's not pro or against. It's just a statement of fact of what's going to happen.
In the evolution of cities since Mesopotamia, cities tend to grow to the west before they really grow to the east. So if you look at metro areas generally, they grow to the west for some reason.
I wasn't around for most.
Except for Phoenix.
Yeah.
Phoenix went all east and now they're going west. So like that.
So now
was
we're
one of
going to
the only
the
ones.
Home city.
Well,
or
it's
the west.
the only thing here in Chicago.
I think there's one way to grow.
That's the reason.
Yeah.
For
But, you know, for a decade, there was no
They
development.
had
in
always
Woodbury.
that.
And then all of a sudden, boom.
I was in college, we went to play cars, and I got a flat tire. Before in Woodbury, and turns out there wasn't even a gas station. To get help on, then to get right back to Hudson.
There's no auto parts.
Oh, gosh.
It's like against their ordinance.
Auto parts,
In Woodbury,
Yeah.
or
vehicles
Like
they
in
drive
O'Reilly,
don't need
it was,
all right,
Okay.
more to come on that one, I'm sure.
Mhm.
Not necessarily even in here, so. All right, any other? business? Important upcoming dates, next week, the 26th, 27th, board workshop retreat, 5 o'clock at the Fit Center, Hudson.
So that 5 o'clock, dinner both nights, we'll get started by 6 o'clock. More details, I'll send out an email.
Eat there.
The next,
catering in.
yeah, I'll work on getting food delivered, so that'll be in the email. I was talking to Brian a little bit about details, but we'll get it delivered right there. I'll take care of all those details, but I'll need your input on kind of your choice of your order.
where were we supposed to try to park?
I'll send that one out again
Okay,
too. Yeah, the FIPS.
It's a parking lot across the
communication.
street.
Yeah, it was credit card type paid, little pay stations now,
You pay till 8.
but there is some free, yeah, Jeff would know best.
Most of it you'd pay by.
Oh, yeah, it was if you could find one of
What
those.
about the park there, isn't that free, still across the street, on the river?
I don't know in the actual, I think it's a zone.
I mean, or you can
I don't
go
think
up
it's
on
free.
top on the
It's not, no,
residential
no.
and try to walk through construction. you know,
It's
do
50
it.
cents an hour.
Okay,
It's gonna
Yeah,
cost you
sure.
$1.50.
Just figuring it out.
And you pay till 8 o'clock.
oh,
Can't wait
okay,
after it.
okay. All right,
That's why you're better
They have
off
an
with the
app for
card.
that now.
Well, the card will only allow you to pay until 8. If you put money in, it'll just let you put as much as you want.
Oh,
So the card kind of
got it.
has saved me before, because I just push quarters in.
you don't pay on Sunday. I was trying to pay on Sunday. The app won't let you pay if they don't charge you. They don't say that with this damn thing.
All right, and then August 2nd, annual meeting, budget hearing starts at 6, annual meeting immediately following the SCC district office. And then August 2nd, board learning special meeting immediately following. And then August 16th, SCC school board meeting at 7 at the district office again. So next is convene a closed session. Per Wisconsin statute 19.851C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility. Then do I read what we're going through?
Yep.
The 21-22 contracts. And for this, we need a roll call vote.
And we're going to
We
closed
need a
session.
motion to.
We need a motion, then roll call
Motion to go into closed session for whatever.
Second.
for all of them.
Aye.
Hi. All right, do we want to break for a couple minutes?
Sure.
Just so we can shut down and everything like that?
Yep.
All right, so, do we need anybody online or not online for this?
No.
No, okay.
No. Nice night, Pete. He joined the last 5 minutes.
Is that just to get his name on the attendees list? Is that kind of like,
Let's keep forward.
if you